coffeejobprojects.com, and this is the Early Bird Artcast, early here on a Saturday morning. It's getting to close about 10 a.m. For me here on the East Coast of the United States. And we're going to talk about doing long-form comic books. And today I have some people with me. We got Teresa Del Pilar. How you doing?
Hello, I'm doing all right.
Awesome. Where can people find you, Teresa?
Here on YouTube, same name, Teresa del Pilar, and on Instagram, same name but with underscores in between the words.
Awesome. And then we got I Sketch Son, aka Chris. How you doing, man?
Hey, what's up?
And where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram at iSketchson.
Awesome.
Name's in the video.
And he's all the way in the Philippines. He's not the only friend of the show in the Philippines. Now we got Yanimal there too, I guess.
Future.
And then we also have Mr. Russ, the comic book black belt. How you doing, man?
Hi there.
Where can people find you, sir?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube under Comic Book Black Belt, or you can find me on Instagram as Russ Leach, or russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com, or onlydeathcansavus.com, and you can sign up for my email subscription list there.
Awesome. Cool. So, yeah, we wanted to talk about long form comics. Last week we were talking about, publishing your own comic with Noah, and that was a really great conversation. But when you publish your comic, there's a lot of different ways you can go about it. A lot of different strategies, or just desires, goals, and things like that. I personally have taken the route of doing a lot of short stories. I don't know if or when I'll ever do long form, but some people choose the long form method. And I don't know. What do you think, Russ? What do you think's better, long form or short form?
It really is. It's personal, isn't it? It's also your desire to see things take form, and how quickly you want them to take form. I suppose because I come from very much from doing page work, so being paid by a publisher to do page work, I see long form, I suppose, as my desired route. It's the route I'm taking from my own book, so a much longer, bigger book. But I think it really comes down to how quickly you want to see it turn out into the real world, I suppose.
That makes sense. What would you say is like? So you're basically saying like, for you, your goal would be kind of maybe. I mean, I think you have. A lot of us have many goals, and it sounds like you want to do some personal work, but you also would like to get hired. So your goals kind of get a nice page rate. In the longer form, the more kind of reliable that income might be.
Yeah, that's the tricky. That's always the balancing act to try and juggle paid work against the work that you really want to do. It's tricky because it obviously puts off the stuff that you really have passion for. I mean, I have passion for all my work, but you have to eat.
Yeah.
So I have to take bits of myself and really throw it into those things in order to make sure I produce a good job for any client that I have. So I'm in the middle of my own book at the moment. I managed to start inking pages, but I'll be ripped off it again pretty soon. So I think it really depends on your circumstance. So as someone who has art as my career, I can't always be doing the things that I want to do. I have to, do the things that other people want me to do in order to make money.
Yeah. Do you feel like you prefer? Do you have a preference when it comes to your own personal work on whether it's long form or short?
As in as in shorter to market, or
just the length of the actual project. You know, it can consider the market or the
I think
the work.
Sorry. I think longer, because I like to tell a longer story, and I've so some of my requirements and desires are and goals are buried in the success of what I do. I suppose that's kind of seeing it from a very pragmatic business perspective, but something I always wanted to do was be paid for producing comic books. I saw it as part of what I was doing. Doesn't mean that everybody has to see it that way. That's just the way I see it. So I tend to find that the long form is what I'm more into, because I feel like I'm going to get a return on that, not just financially from a marketing perspective, but also from what I put into any story. I'm going to see a sort of hopefully a reader response from that. Again, it's all personal, isn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. No, that's interesting for sure. Chris, you what do you think? Are you more do you seem like more attracted to long form work, or are you more into doing short little anthology things or whatever it is? I know we got a little bit of a delay on Chris, so
I think he may not be there, actually.
Oh, I gotta add him again. You there, Chris? Hello. All right, we'll go on to Teresa. What about you? What do you prefer these days? Are you more interested in long form or short form?
Well,
Yeah, my net is just bad. Sorry, guys.
oh, he's back.
Okay, we
Should
can we can hear you now. We're gonna go with Teresa, and then we'll come back to you, Chris. Okay.
At the minute, I'm interested in a graphic novel length, like 200 plus, but not like too long, because long form can be very long. Like when we're talking about, I don't know, runs of some comics or manga, for example, that can go for thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. I'm not interested in that kind of length. So I suppose it depends on what you mean with long form. So I'm not really interested in super long, as in epic, spend 15 years doing the same story. But I am interested in doing something more than short stories, although I do love short stories.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, there's definitely a lot of different things that long form can mean, and I think as comic creators, anything over, maybe, I don't know, eight pages to, or maybe like a few pages to like one issue could probably be considered, I guess, short form. And then once you start getting into the trade paperback to graphic novel size, I feel like that's probably more like medium form, or even still kind of short form. But I think as creators trying to do everything ourselves, we kind of feel like that's long form.
Yeah.
And then, obviously the working on the same book for years and years, that's where we really get into long form, I would say. What about you, Chris? Do you prefer working on long form projects or short? Hopefully he's there this time. Chris. I don't hear you, man. Seems like he was in there pretty solidly, but for some reason he's not coming through. Next time we hear you, we'll ask you the question again. So for me, I mean, long form, it's always hard to like when to answer this kind of question, because you think about like, the marketing side or the, actual working on it side. And I guess what's most fulfilling for the actual creator, I mean, I think that's the first question you have to ask, ask yourself, what kind of what kind of comic did you envision making, when you wanted to get into this passion, and for me, I mean, I grew up on the monthly issue type of thing, but I also really was frustrated by the monthly issue thing. I got just the tiniest little tidbits of story, and some stories were barely stories as it is. So I actually was thinking that I think I want more long form stories. You know, Obviously, I think some of the traditional graphic novels that really kind of helped kick it off, at least in around my time, was things like Watchmen and Dark Knight and stuff like that. But there's been a lot of other things like that too. I guess reading full like runs of comics too. It depends on what kind of creative team and what kind of book it is and stuff. But you could see more satisfying stories within those. But at the same time, it just takes a long time to do long form. And I personally, a big part of what I want to do is get a lot of, IPs out there. I like coming up with ideas, creating new ideas. That's just a huge thing for me that I'm attracted to. So it would be hard for me in some ways to go long form, but I also really do see the benefits of long form, because if you have a world that you've created and you've kind of established that world, then you can kind of throughout time like riff on that world and explore that world, and you can bring in new different characters and stuff. So that's exciting too. So
I think as Teresa was saying, I'm somewhere in the middle. We're talking about long form and short form. If you if you have a book out every month and you add them all up after 3 years, that's long form. So it really depends how you come at it. I think what you were saying about what you want out of it at the end, what I want to create a story or a character, or at the very least, if I'm following somebody else's script, a set of pages that people enjoy and extract something out of, whether it's a message, whether it's the story itself, or whether it's just looking at the pictures. Doesn't matter, as long as there's enjoyment at the other end, at the reader end. So I suppose, yeah, I'm kind of, as described on Cast, kind of medium way in, because what I really want to do is produce maybe 1 or 2 60-page books a year. And it might even be the same character and story over a period of time, which would be considered long form, I suppose. But it's kind of medium in the short term, because you're wanting to get stuff out and get people to read it as quickly as possible, because you want to feed that story and feed the interaction between yourself and your audience.
Right. Yeah. I think as well, another thing to take into consideration is the type of story you're going to tell, because the format and the length is going to define the type of story that is most effective. So, for example, if you think about novels, and you think about novels as being something that is published as you publish the novel, you read it, and that's what graphic novels are. You publish the whole thing, a story from beginning to end. But if you think about the beginning of novels, when Dickens and all these people, they were published weekly on newspapers, on deadline, like comic artists do. And the type of novel that creates is different to the type of novel that you create if you sit down for 5 years and create that novel while sitting down. So it's really like there's not. It has to do a lot with your creative process, the relationship you want to have with your audience, the marketing aspects, the publishing aspects. Like, there's so many things that are. I mean, we could dissect every single one of these aspects, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's one that is better than the other. It's just the result you get and the story you get is different.
Yeah.
So you need to know what you're going for before deciding whether you're going short or long or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, good call.
So, for example, if you go to mangas that are like, I don't know, however many thousand pages, they have those ones that go on for years and years and years. Something that you can do in there that you cannot do in a graphic novel is character development. So every single character in those books will have a massive character arc. They can go forwards, backwards. They can they can do a lot of movement with the characters that cannot happen in a 200-page graphic novel, for example. So if you're interested in character development, you should probably go for ridiculously long. And again, like you said, Marsh, world building, I think, is one that stupidly long does really well. But then again, it's like, are you interested in doing that? If not, you shouldn't go for that, because it's a lot of work for something you're not even interested in.
Yeah. And I think part of it, maybe part of the decision with this kind of thing is, and this is a debate too, is, you know, when you're first starting out, you know, say this is the first comic project you're even trying, you know, there's two different schools of thought. You know, I personally like the idea of going short form, because I realize how hard comics are and how overwhelming it can be. And even if you're trying to do a full 24-page issue your first time out the door, even that's a task. You know, even that like can take you a very long time, depending on how, you know, if you're just doing the penciling or just doing, you know, the inking or something like that, then it's not such a big deal. But if you're doing the whole thing from start to finish, you know, that can take some time, especially since it's your first time, because you're learning so much. So I personally, as I've said many times, tend to prefer the short form, you know, mini comics and maybe web comics or just, you know, anthology stuff, because it helps you to kind of get in the game and learn, you know. And to me, each small comic project that I do is a whole new learning thing, and I'm kind of building up my patience, building up my stamina and my ability as I go. As opposed to taking on a huge, you know, Lord of the Rings, you know, type of book or something and getting partially through it and then, you know, realizing, you know, maybe I want to, now I'm like so much better at it. Maybe I want to start over, you know. I hear that a lot, you know, and I really want to avoid that kind of thing. But there are people that take the opposite route. You know, they start with their big project and maybe that's the only project they ever want to do.
Yeah, it's I think something else you can do as well is because of the nature of comic books, exactly what Teresa was talking about with the way that novels were put together by Dickens and what have you, is it being episodic. So I'm starting out on my book and I'm hoping that it's going to have quite a big scope. And I wonder if someone like Mike Mignola had a large scope for Hellboy when he started. I mean, I don't know how many series he wrote of Hellboy, but they were all in 4s, weren't they? They were all in mini-series. And then he put the mini-series together and that went out, and that was a story arc in its own right. And then he added more stories as it went along. Did he have the final goal in mind? Or did he start writing and thinking, oh, I can expand this as I go? So, for instance, if I put my book together and everybody loves it, then I think, right, okay, I've written it in such a way that I can expand it because I've got more ideas for it. The idea actually is that I have other writers work on it as well. But if it doesn't do so well, then maybe I have to start again. But there's that sort of short form and long form all in the one attempt, as it were. Depends how you go at it. So you can do it in an episodic way, but still get things out very quickly. I suppose web comics are a bit like that, because they put them together once they've got lots and lots of stuff out, and then they put printed books out of the web comics. So I suppose it depends, as we were saying earlier, it depends on your end goal and how you want to get there.
Yeah. And, you know, even, you know, bringing up Tolkien and stuff with Lord of the Rings, you know, that's a pretty well-known epic type of long form type of thing. But, you know, and I don't think he was even focused on even selling the book or marketing it even initially at all. But, you know, he kind of accidentally, tested the waters with The Hobbit, and then he wanted to just keep going with that. And he was encouraged after the success of The Hobbit to, publish this Lord of the Rings thing he was working on. And, he did, but it wasn't, I think even though he wasn't thinking of it as, a straight up marketing thing or anything, he was just creating because he loved creating, basically. I think that is actually a good model, find a way to test the market, maybe do a short web comic on one of the characters in your big story or something like that. Or, there's probably a lot of different ways to kind of do that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for what you're saying, Mars, like testing the waters, seeing what you like, because a lot of the times if you say, oh, I'm going to make an epic story, and I think it's because of marketing, it makes it look like epic stories or big stories are the most emotionally engaging ones, like the most exciting ones, the most dramatic ones. But it doesn't have to be that way. I've read comics that were 10 pages that have made me bald like a baby, and then I've watched a 2-hour epic movie and I was like, well, that was all right, and I left the cinema. So whatever, like, it doesn't necessarily have to be an epic to stay with a person and to affect them emotionally. So I think that's where a lot of people say, like, I'm going to do an epic thing because of the marketing aspect of it and what we're being sold, when in fact it's not necessarily better.
Yeah, you could do the mini epic, a small story, but you can get pretty big with something like that. It really, there's so many different ways. There's compressed storytelling and things like that. Trying to think of like examples and stuff, but I don't know, but there's definitely different ways to go about it for sure.
If you look at things like 2000 AD and the what was it, the Thrills? I can't remember what they were called, but they did short stories. They were the editor was the alien editor was called Tharg, and it was Tharg's something shocks or future shocks, I think, something like that.
Oh,
and they were always
future shock.
Yeah, and they were always short stories, and I found those to be, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of those to be quite poignant and quite. They were focused on the message they wanted to get across. So just in 4 pages or 5 pages, sometimes even just 2, they managed to shock you. That's what they were, future shocks, and they were really great. One that really sticks in my mind was, sorry if there's spoilers in this, it's an old story, was where 2 astronauts crashed on a planet a long way from home, and the aliens didn't know how humans were made up, and they kind of stuck all their limbs back together. So the guy at the end was like totally shocked by the way that he looked. But there were all kinds of questions put, and his inner monologue as he got better and recovered. As a young, as a kid reading that, there were so many questions that I had from that, and it's a very poignant story. I mean, it's still in my mind now. And there were others just like that, great stories. And so I think you can get scope, as exactly as Teresa was saying, you can get scope, and you can get inferred scope almost, because you're in such a short story. Inferred scope and inferred drama from potentially a large, bigger story. And I think even some of those future shock stories ended up being longer stories as well. So it's almost like getting the stuff out. I know, for instance, people often put their characters in anthologies to test them out before they take them to their own books. I mean, that's a good way of having both ends of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. I think about that too. Like, I like that idea of the future shock thing. And, I think of like even Twilight Zone, like they did some very big things in that with just very limited amount of time, and even, limited amount of, I guess, budget and technology and stuff like that. And maybe another example of that is like Black Mirror. It's kind of a similar vibe. It's an anthology. There's small stories, and they really say a lot, sometimes more than most TV shows and movies I see. So Chris is in the chat, though. He did kind of have his answer in there. He says, I personally enjoy long form stories so long as they don't overstay their welcome. And that's a great point. I think I think that's definitely happened. Maybe just look at literally all of Marvel and DC. But I mean, obviously, there's a lot of awesome stories within all of that long legacy of comic books. But even manga, I love manga, but do they meander too long sometimes? Probably. But and that again, like Teresa's point, what does your story, kind of suggest? What's natural for your story? And that's a hard thing to figure out. Like, I wonder, how do you figure that out? Like, because you can take any story, even if it's long, and cram it into a few pages if you want. But you can also take a little tiny story and extrapolate it, So, but, how do you make that decision?
That's difficult. No, I was just going to say that I was remembering, Edgar Allan Poe, I think, is one of the classic examples of those short stories with high shock value that stay with you afterwards, because you're like, oh, damn, that happened. And he wrote an essay about writing. And he said that he preferred the short story because he had a unity of impressions, meaning that if you're going for like a strong impression of one simple idea, the short story is the best form to do it. And I think that's how I would make the decision. Like, what effect do you want to have on in your audience? Because like long form, for example, a TV show that lasts a stupid amount of years, or a DC Marvel type thing, what they do is they create a really, in my opinion, a very strong connection between the viewers or the readers and the characters. So like you care about those characters and you want to see their outcomes, right? That doesn't happen in a short story. If the guy or the girl in the story dies, you don't care too much. It's like, oh, well, that's too bad. But people get really upset about characters in long form. So I suppose it's like, what do you want the audience to feel like, or to get out of it? That's how I would make my decision.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Who did you say, was it Edgar Allan Poe? You were saying that?
Yeah. It was an
really
essay he wrote.
How you can make like a better point or a stronger point with a short story. I like that. Not to say you can't, do stuff with long form stories as well. I mean, when you think about it, especially in like an episodic thing that just kind of doesn't really have an end, there's a lot of mini stories in that. And I think a lot about like TV shows and stuff. So you have the opportunity to explore. You're still in the same setting, so you're still kind of playing around with the same themes, but you have a lot more characters too that you can kind of, bring through a lot of different process. Like, like I said, I think about like Grey's Anatomy, because my wife and I watch that a lot, and it's a hospital theme. Or setting, and there's themes about, a lot of times there's themes of like life and death. How do you help somebody? Is it worth it to keep them like on life support or something for long periods of time? Who makes these decisions? What are the boundaries that like a doctor could go through? And then also the how real life affects these surgeons and things like that, and so that question, I think, is an ongoing debate, and they get into other things too that aren't necessarily directly related, and they hit it like from literally every kind of angle, because they have so many different characters, and they're all involved in different ways, and it's a way to kind of almost be even more fair about any particular topic. You can show it from, a religious standpoint. You can show it from a political standpoint, or all kinds of different, ways of thinking. So yeah, it's an opportunity to explore. Whereas, in something like Twilight Zone, you kind of make your point, you get in and you get out.
Yeah, well, a long form will give you the opportunity to show multiple sides of an argument or a character, a persona, whatever it might be. You get that opportunity, don't you? I think short stories are more there, as we were saying, just to punch that singular subject or approach, thought process, whatever it is, punch that home. I think it's definitely the case that some things can go on too long. I think with people like Marvel, certainly from the perspective of the comic books, it's probably business that has driven them, because obviously they want to continue to sell comics, which I suppose is similar to what I was saying earlier about wanting to have that perspective of people actually valuing what you do. I don't think it's the same from a publisher's perspective as from an artist's perspective. But it's still the same thing at the end of the day. You want people to buy the books, whether that's because you want to connect with them and you want to make sure that your story gets out to an audience, or whether you're just in the business of selling books. You want to make your characters and your story attractive to your potential readership. So I can see why publishers would go for the long haul, as it were. They would want to entice you with characters that, like you were saying, you connect to and want to stay with for a long time, rather than the short shock or the short impression of a pointed story. But even then, with episodic work, you kind of have to walk the line between the two, because it used to be the case that each book you got every month or every week often had a cliffhanger ending, but it had a story within it, and that was what was clever about the books from back then, from the Bronze Age and what have you, was that people could jump on at any time. They didn't have to wait for it to be rebooted as a number one. You could jump in, and it was the characters that were continuous. It was the way that they were, those people, those characters that you loved, that you could connect with. So like Spider-Man was an everyman character at the time, and anyone could just jump in at number one or at number 50 or at number 250 and find that they could connect with the story and get going with it. And each episode, each book, each monthly book also had a short story within it, as it were, within the long form story. So that I thought was very clever, the way they did that. However, a lot of TV shows and film series nowadays, they just peter out, because it's all about just how much more money can we make, how long can we string this series on for. The amount of series that I've watched on the TV where I thought, I wish they'd just wound that up in 1 or 2 series, and they've stretched it out to 5, and you're bored stiff by the end of it. And of course it's made the point of the story and the weight of the story that much less, because by the end of it you're bored and you're not giving it the attention that the story really was due, because it's just gone on too long. And comics can do that as well, I think.
Yeah, I think going back to what Marsh was saying is, if you're treating topics like life and death and things like that are super complex, then long form makes a lot of sense. But I think sometimes what happens with these stories that seem to be dragging out is because maybe the themes or the characters weren't as deep to begin with, and it's like, how much more is there to say?
Yeah.
Not much more. And going back to the idea of publishers and marketing and all that stuff, I'm not entirely sure like what the industry finds more profitable apparently with American comics is to have a character, an IP, and then milk it as much as possible. And that works for them because they have the distribution and they have the money to get a lot of books out, etc. I imagine, I don't know, but I know that for independent artists it is better to get more books out. And the more books you get out, the more money you make. So if you can get a book out every month, then however many sales you have, exactly, yeah, that's not possible really, but if you can do that, you make a very decent living with your comics.
Yeah.
So long form is sort of a privilege, I think, for people that have other sources of income as well. So you have to look at that aspect.
Yeah, definitely. Nail and head in that sentence.
That's interesting. I haven't thought of it like that. That long form is a privilege, and it does make sense. It does make sense for sure. I think one thing too that's interesting is in long form. I think world building maybe is more important in long form than it is in short form. Maybe. I mean, it's kind of an important aspect no matter what. But I think about some of the different kind of more long form type of things that I've taken in. I think of things like obviously Lord of the Rings, I've said, but Harry Potter and even kind of Star Wars. I guess it wasn't necessarily 100% intended as long form, but the world is really a big part of it, and creating, I think, especially of Harry Potter, creating a world that you want to hang out in, and where there is a lot to explore, is pretty important. As opposed to, other stories where it's like, well, the world is interesting, but we're really focusing just on a specific character interaction. And I don't know. I mean, even in short form, I think about like Twilight Zone, and there's a lot of kind of world building. It's like kind of shorthand, world building, where you kind of really rely heavily on symbols that the culture already knows, and maybe even stories that the culture already knows, but kind of make your own kind of bring your own take to it and stuff. Do you think about that world building and long form versus short form?
I would argue that in short form, character is king. Obviously, your characters are hugely important, but I would, and some people say they write story first with characters, and characters first with story. And I see benefits and pros and cons with both approaches. But I would imagine if you're writing short stories, because you're trying to get a point across, because that's the whole point, isn't it? You're not trying to set up. If you're writing a short story in 5 pages, you don't have 5 pages to set up a scene or to set up an environment where your story continues. You have to make a point. That's it. It's a short story, and then character in that environment would be the key part to it, rather than world building. So perhaps you would infer a world that was already built.
Yeah, I would say like for shorter stories, I tend to I don't do a lot of world building, I'll be honest. And most of my stories are set in places that I've either lived in or know very well. And then I change them a little bit so that they're not entirely recognizable. But I know where they are. I know where all my stories are happening, and I know that place. Because if you're going to make a story that is 10-page long, then why would you make up a whole world for it? It just seems like such a waste of time to me. But there's people that love world building and they enjoy it. So, knock yourself out. But I don't think that's the best use of your time, to be honest.
Well, what about, the current, I don't know if it's the current project. I don't know exactly what you're working on these days, Teresa, but I know you had that one that you were sending the script out for. That seems like kind of more of a world buildy. Isn't that a little bit long form?
No, I know where it happens. It's in Spain. It's just, it's like a alternative history type thing. So I know where it is. I wouldn't say I made up a name for a town, but I know exactly what area it is. I know what year it is. I know what the political situation in Spain was. But I'm not going to mention any of that. But I know it. I know when it is and where it is. And then this is an alternative history, so I can do whatever I want. So that's one approach you can take if you're going to do a long-ish forum. Then take an alternative history of some part of history and area you know really well, because why not?
Right. But there is some world building as far as I don't want to give anything away. I don't know.
No, don't worry. Yeah, like magic and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
the magic stuff is exactly where I was going with that.
Yeah. I had to do that. And like there are elements of the magic that I'm still figuring out, and it's really difficult. So I don't know how people do it for super long stuff, but I'm struggling to create the logic, the internal logic of the whole thing. And I didn't want to go further and create like a planet or something, because that's just that's a lot.
Yeah.
Planets are big.
Yeah, I know. There's people like create galaxies and stuff, and I'm like,
I mean,
whoa,
talk about world building. That's worlds building.
jeez.
So another thing that kind of I'm thinking of during this is, some people write stories and they start with the end in mind. And so, but at the same time, some people don't, but they do bring it to an end once they finish writing the story. And then some people kind of create characters in a world, and then they just say, let's start and see where it ends up, So I think it's interesting because I think you got like Marvel DC, where that's the last one I just said is pretty much the case. And then you got, manga, where they do have an end in mind, but they still are long form. Does knowing the end, or, is the end important? Is that something you guys think about when you're creating your comics and stories? What about you, Russ?
I've only actually written 2 of my own scripts, and I knew the end before I started writing. So maybe that's the way I do things. For one of them, I knew the end because it was in both of my scripts are some underlying opinions on the way the world works in a very deep way. And I enjoyed writing those into the work, because I'm very much, I want to write a fantasy stroke sci-fi piece. So the kind of things that I've been thinking about and pondering over the last 10 years while I've been beavering away, drawing pages for other people and listening to rubbish on YouTube, have kind of fired my desire to write something about those subjects. So that kind of fueled the end point for both stories. For the book that will be coming out next year, hopefully, the Only Death Can Save Us, the idea was to have an end point that was a jumping off point for the next book. So I don't know where it's going to finish. Part of that is because if my plan comes together, I'd like to get multiple other writers to write the parts. So I've written the first part, which is the concept and the whole thing coming together and the introduction of the characters, and then see where other people might take that and take the world. And also the idea was that my character could end up in anybody else's book, ever, anywhere in the entire frame of existence. He could just turn up and be a part of that world. So that was part of the writing. So I suppose that in itself is an end point that I wanted to get to. So I'm rambling now, but I think the end point, that was where I started. I don't necessarily think that's the best place for everyone to start, but it was a means to an end for the stories that I wanted to write. But like I say, I've only written 2 stories. Everything else I've done has all been other people's scripts, and I just do what I'm told. I'm an art monkey.
For me, I do need to know the ending, but it's funny because it's not for the same reason as Russ. I need to know the ending because I need to guide the readers into being able to sort of predict what's going to happen, because I don't think it's, I don't know about you, but I can't watch a film or read a book or do whatever relating to story if I cannot predict more or less what's going to happen. If there's not a sense of intrigue, like, oh, this could be happening next or this could be happening next, that's important for me. So if I don't know the ending, how the heck are the readers gonna predict the ending, which is part of the fun for me in stories. And then what tends to happen is I have an ending, I start putting those clues, and then by the end I reach the whole plot. I say like, okay, so now what am I trying to say here? And then I go back and I think about, what am I trying to say? So it's completely the opposite to Russ, because whenever you write a story, you're going to say something about something, whether you want it or not. And I just want to go back and make sure that I'm not being an idiot, you know?
Yeah.
This is like, what is my story saying? It's saying terrible things. I should really look into that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think that I like to have I want to have control over what my story is saying, you know. And I do want to explore, but I think you can kind of do both. And so I think it is interesting. I like kind of what Russ was saying. You know, it's almost like there is an end, but it's also open ended. It's like kind of both. You know, it's like even if you have an end in mind for a story, and I guess this really lends to comics more because I think it's a little bit more versatile to kind of fluctuate or change. You know, once you finish the story, there's a lot of possibilities of what you can do. Whereas with a TV show or a movie, there's big budgets involved, and that does happen, but maybe it's you know, it's not as easy to pull off sometimes. But you know, with comics and stuff, you know, it's kind of like I feel like Russ is saying he has an end in mind. He has a full story he wants to tell, but at the end of that story, you know, the possibilities are endless, kind of thing. So you know, and one thing that's interesting that I've talked actually to Fue Storm about a little bit is a lot of times you write a story, and that first initial story kind of creates the story engine. So you create that one and done story. Like I think of Glyph, and we have an idea of what the Glyph story is going to be. It'll be like probably somewhere around 3 to 4 issues, and it'll be a full kind of graphic novel type of story. But at the end of that, it sets off like, okay, now these are the characters. This is the universe, the world they live in. Now, you know, there's so much more that can happen, but now you know the characters. And so there's a lot that you can play on off of that, but you've still told a complete story. So you can kind of have the best of both worlds in some ways. Chris was saying, I make use of story arcs, each one being unique and affecting the character's status quo. And then he continues, could do 100-page arc, then another and another, so on till you reach the ending that you knew was going to happen. So that's another interesting kind of way of going about it too, is you know, I've heard some comic writers, I think maybe Kirkman has said this with Walking Dead, but I could be wrong. He did end that already, but there's also McFarlane has talked about, I think, having an end for Spawn, but you know, he may never get to it, you know. So kind of, you kind of know an end, but you know, you also have the room to, in between the beginning and the end, to do all kinds of things. And you know, story arcs really are stories in and of themselves. You know, and a lot of times they're kind of intertwined. So there's just so much ways to play around with this whole thing. It also, I think, you know, once, I don't know, like how it's kind of hard to tell from the beginning, but like how how much fun do you have working on the story? You know, say you created Spawn or something, and you're like, you get into issue 2, 3, 4, and you're like, I am so sick of drawing chains and whatever else there is, spikes and all this stuff. Like, you know, I don't think I want to continue with this story. How fun is it for you to create in that world? Or you come to the point and you're like, I could do this for the rest of my life. I love drawing chains and spikes. Like, give me skulls all day. So I think that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, like going to an example of that, Akira Toriyama, the guy that did Dragon Ball. Um, Initially, he just wanted to do like a soft porn thing. That was what initially Dragon Ball was. And if you read the beginning of Dragon Ball, not Dragon Ball Z, is a lot about Goku being very naive and not knowing the difference between men and women, and then like a lot of panty jokes, like knickers and stuff. So it was supposed to be that, but then the editor started to say like, oh, kids really like this stuff, so I think you need to change the tone. I think you need to change this. And in the end, what happened is like he was sick of Goku and he wanted to kill him. And in fact, in Dragon Ball Z, he dies. And his plan was like, Goku's going to have a son that is not an idiot, because he was tired of writing an idiot. And I'm going to replace him. And then when Goku died, everyone was so shocked, but that the editor was like, no, he has to come back to life. He has to. And, he tried to kill him a couple of times, but the fans wouldn't have it. And in the end, he was enslaved to Goku and he was sick of it. And it's exactly like that. Drawing the hair, he was sick of it. He was sick of his personality. He didn't want to do anything with it. And for a while, there was a whole run of Dragon Ball that was written and drawn by other people because he was like, no, I don't want to do any more of this shit.
the chance to be so successful to say, oh, I'm fed up with this.
Yeah, exactly. Like the guy just set out to do a little bit of, silly soft porn type thing. And in the end, he ended up with this epic alien story. And he's like, how did this happen? I don't know.
Oh.
So you can be a slave to your long stories at the end, I think. So if you value your freedom, I would say don't get involved in those, because you never know what's going to happen.
And it's a good point too. It's really weird because I think kind of Batman's kind of like that, because the way it started out is very kind of sort of different than what it is now. And, it was just a little weird, and now it's kind of what it is. I don't know. But like, there's a lot of different stories like that where they're going to they kind of have the freedom to kind of go all over the place and evolve and become something different. And really, I don't think people decide that that's what's going to happen from the get-go. And not only that, but like you're saying, like, if you're the creator of that, you started it, but you're not going to be the one, finishing it and continuing it. So, I guess that's just an anomaly, and especially if it's successful, I mean, yeah.
I think I'll take the chance.
Yeah.
I'll take that risk.
I think it's a good problem to have indeed, but still, if it's something that you would dread and absolutely make your life miserable, then reconsider.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that's interesting, Ronnie kind of talks about a little similar. I prefer long if it's enticing for the reader coming back. Like if you want a team of heroes have their own short stories, then make longer ones where they build as their relationships. And this isn't exactly what he's saying, but it makes me think of, spinoffs and stuff like that. And that's another possibility too. Like if you love the world, but you really just want to tell a complete story, well, that doesn't mean, you can't have a spinoff of another character and stuff. What is that? I'm trying to think of, what's the one that show with Heisenberg? I can't think of the name of it. Oh,
Breaking Bad.
Yeah, so you got Breaking Bad, but now they have, or I don't know, this might have even ended, is the Better Call Saul show. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's a pretty cool show. But it takes one character or a couple characters and it spins off, and we've seen it endless times with comics. I mean, there's pretty much think of a comic and you can think of many spin-offs, to it if it was a popular comic.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility too. Let's see. Let's see. Question from Marv. I haven't read this one, so let's see what happens. What's up, Mario, man? Thanks for hanging out with us. We need a day job, but they suck, so I don't have the time. I need to finish my comic, so I'm breaking it into chapters or mini comics. What's the best way to promote it? Webtoons, possibility. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and I think that's interesting. A question with long form too is, we've talked more about the craft of it, the storytelling of it, which I think is really interesting, but also the marketing of it. You know, I think that if you're going to tell long form, I think that either way is good personally. I actually kind of feel like maybe long form is better in some ways because with long form and marketing, you can break your long form up into small pieces. And you're telling a story over time. You're building up the hype for a story to the point where they're going to want to know what the end is eventually. So you're really building something. And it's funny that because I'm really into like marketing and strategy and stuff, but it's funny that that's not even close to my approach yet. I feel like I'll probably do that someday, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But for me, it's about, getting short stories out. And I want to, just have a lot of things out there, kind of being in the world, I guess. I don't know. And I don't know if that's the best way, though, because, I don't know. I could see how you could though, because each story has its own potential to become, its own bigger thing. And I think of like Stephen King, something like that. Like how he's got maybe thousands, but he's definitely got hundreds of stories out there. Probably more in the hundreds, I guess. But he's got hundreds of stories out there, and a lot of them have taken on a life of their own, and had movies, had TV shows, had second, versions of those movies, third even maybe. So, there is something to be said, and also you get to play in different worlds. If you have creative ADD like me, you kind of have to go that route. So I don't know. What do you think as far as marketing when it comes to that, Russ? I guess looks like you maybe have something to say.
No, I was just listening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's really tricky, isn't it? I would say from what I can see, because I'm not experienced in webcomics, but from what I can see, if you want to tell a short form story and you want to get it out to an audience as quickly as possible, that's probably the best route to go. From a marketing perspective, and this will be hard if it's something that you're doing, and you have a side hustle that you spend most of your time at during the day, making money to pay the mortgage. It can be difficult to find the time to do these things, but your own website is very important, and social media is very important as far as specifically for webcomics. This is just like I say, I don't have any experience in this. This is just what I've picked up over the time and what I can see around me. So I think if you want to get a story out and you're committed to getting a portion of that out every week, then webcomics is without doubt the way to go. You can always, as we've seen many people do, you can always put them together in a later date and go for a Kickstarter or whatever and publish them. And have them in a book format and add extras for people, and those things are often very attractive to buy. Marketing from long form, I think that the clue is in the name, long. You have to play the long game. You have to get yourself out there, make yourself available to people. I think YouTube is a fantastic platform for that, actually, because I think what attracts me about comics, because it's what attracted me to comics as a kid, was being involved in the story. So I would read Marvel comics mostly as a kid, and Stan Lee always enticed everybody in, almost like part of a family. He would he would edit and put messages in the books to the readers, make them feel like they were part of it. So you felt an interaction. Considering that, at the time it was all done with print, it was amazing how interactive it felt. And now you've got a real chance to be interactive with all the people that might read your book, all the potential audiences out there. And it doesn't matter whether it's YouTube or Facebook or just your own website and an email connection. There's ways and means of people being truly interactive with the story that you're trying to produce. And I think that interaction is really what people are after. It's limited, and when you read comic books, it's a limited way of doing it. But already you're interacting with more senses, as it were, than you are when you just read, or when you just watch a film. You've got audio, you've got visual, and you're reading, and you have your own imagination, and you fill in the gaps because it's not a film. It doesn't show you everything. It's like a strobe light going off in a room. That's what sequential panels are. So you're doing a whole bunch of things with your mind and your imagination while you read comics. And the interactive part of it, for me, is what drove me as a kid. And I think it's definitely part of what drives me now. And that, I think, can be a big part of the way that you promote yourself and you tell people about your book. And at the same time, you're telling people about yourself and why you're passionate about the story or about comics in general. And that people like that, because we all want to feel part of something, and we want to feel like we can be part of each other's passions, because especially when you've got the same passions.
I would say, like, in terms of web comics, long form tends to work better, just because building up a web comic audience is all about grinding, basically. Because especially if you don't work with a company or if a marketing advisor or anything like that, it's all about getting updates often and get them out consistently. And it's a slow build up. So I would say long form is more effective. Just looking at the webcomic scenarios, like on Instagram, for example, those 4-panel strips that people do, that they start with little jokes and people start signing up and they get them out every single day. Like, people that are successful in that realm, they get them out every day. So I don't know. I would say long form is a good idea for webcomics in particular. And if you're thinking about Webtoons or Tapastic, Webtoons has a lot more readers, like 5, 6, 7 times more readers than Tapastic. It's much bigger, so you can accumulate a bigger audience there. But the interface is horrible. It's a website that is designed for readers, not for authors. And that's why it has more readers than Tapastic, because it's designed for readers and for their enjoyment. So yeah, if you want to go that route, it's like hold on for a long ride, get a lot of updates out as much as possible for as many years as you can, and eventually you'll build up something. So yeah. Episodic long form for webcomics is the most popular format at the minute, but maybe everything will change in like a year. Who knows?
Yeah, I was when I was talking about getting stuff out, I agree with you 100%. It's about long form stories, but just the desire to get content out as quickly as possible to your readership is going to be, via webcomics is obviously going to be the way to do it, because you don't have to. If you're doing a book, you have to wait until you finish the book and then print it, because you can't print it page by page. God, it's hard enough doing a book as it is, let alone doing it that way. So that, getting those things connecting with your audience in that manner, I think is a really good way to do it. But it depends whether you're patient or not, and you want to produce it in a printed format, or literally you just want to get your story out and get it to people. I'm very much a traditionalist. My work won't be, when I do finish my book, it won't be PDF. It won't be for digital download. You'll have to buy the book because I want it in a printed format. I want to know that that's the interaction that I'm getting with people.
Yeah.
Call me old.
No, there's I think a lot of us feel the same way. Even younger generations, I think they like to have physical books sometimes. I mean, everybody's different, but I think a lot of people do enjoy that kind of token, and there's something awesome to having the actual book in your hand, and even more convenient than looking at your iPad or something. Sometimes in some ways. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. So, anyways, I mean, I think we've kind of spun around this topic a bit here and gotten to some interesting things. Once again, Teresa, where can people find you?
Here on YouTube, same name as my thingy here somewhere. Oh my God, here. And on Instagram, same name, but with underscores in between the words.
Awesome. And Russ, where can people find you?
Yeah, Comic Book Black Belt is the name of my YouTube channel, or you can find me at russleach.com, comicbookblackbelt.com, or the name of my book, onlydeathcansavus.com, and also on Instagram and places like that. And there'll be a link there for my email subscription list so that you can keep up with what's going on.
Absolutely. And don't forget about Mr. Chris Isaacson. He's, again, everybody's links are down below in the early bird guest list there down in the description. And you guys know where to find me, donkeyjawprojects.com. Thank you, everybody in the chat. You guys were awesome. We had some great questions and feedback there. So you guys are awesome. Thanks for everybody on the replay. Let us know what you think in the comments, and we can continue this discussion in there. So other than that, you guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you next time on the Early Bird Artcast.
Bye-bye.
See ya.